And this is the truth, brothers and sisters, for we are golden in the eyes of God. Us, our children, our grandchildren, each and every one of us. To him and to Jesus Christ, we are greater in value to the purest gold and the most radiant, sparkling diamonds. For God's love has no limits. He loves us more than anything else he has created. And it was his infinite, undying love for us that he gave us dominion over the earth and all of its creatures. He made us the stewards of his creation. Tell me, my friends, is there any greater act of love than that?
The congregation was silent as Pastor Jonah Rock stood over them, delivering his sermon with a calm, yet deep passion. It was the same passion he'd spoken with 15 years ago, back when my family had taken me to this very church.
No,
Pastor Jonah said softly.
No, there is no greater love than that. It is because his infinite love that has prepared us for his kingdom, where we will live out our greatest golden days forever and ever. And what does he ask for in return? So very little. Only our belief, only our faith. Only for us to love him in return. For us to love our neighbors as we love him and as we love ourselves. Tell me, brothers and sisters, is that a lot? Is it? Does he ask a lot for us to love him and his creation in return? No. I do not believe that he does.
He looked out over the assembled crowd. His eyes passed over me for a moment, but did not linger. He didn't seem to notice or recognize me. I was almost disappointed, but it had been 15 years. I probably looked nothing like I had back then, and I probably wasn't the only person whose life that man had destroyed. So why should he care if one of them showed up to one of his sermons? We were all just suckers to him. Meat he could use and exploit as he needed to. And seeing how some of the people around me drank up every word he said, it was hard to argue with that assessment. Just seeing it boiled my blood a little bit, but I kept my mouth shut for the time being. I'd get my moment. I just needed to wait a little while longer. It'd been our mom's idea to help out with the local fall food drive. She and my dad were always fairly avid supporters of the local parish, and I needed some community service hours for high school. The fall food drive would have given me 20 of them. Plus, Pastor Jonah said that Anthony could tag along with me, meaning he wouldn't be home alone while they worked. On paper, it sounded like a fantastic idea, and despite not being particularly thrilled about having to work and watch my kid brother at the same time, it wasn't the worst arrangement in the world. I might have even looked back on the whole thing as a good experience, if it weren't for that fucking priest. I remembered that there had been a funeral that evening. Anthony and I had agreed to stay in the office to keep out of the way while Pastor Jonah had done the service, but I still remember seeing the solemn faces entering the chapel. I'd stolen a look while they were setting up, and was sad to see that I'd recognized the face wreathed in flowers near the altar. He was a kid who'd gone to my school. I think his name might have been Kinney. We hadn't been friends, but we'd shared some classes. I wish I could say I was surprised, but funerals were common in my part of town. There were a lot of gangs there. People did dumb things, got involved in dumb disputes that they really shouldn't have. I didn't know if Kinney was into any of that, but It wouldn't have surprised me if he was. A lot of guys were. They didn't always have a choice. The work went pretty quietly. Anthony mostly kept to himself, playing his Game Boy while I tallied up the donations for that week. By the time the funeral service had ended, I was getting ready to run them down to the storage room. I told Anthony to stay put while I loaded the boxes onto the cart and moved them over to the kitchenette in the parish hall. The wake was still ongoing, but most of the funeral attendants had left, leaving only a few family members offering condolences to the grieving mother. They didn't pay me any mind as I went to the pantry and began to sort and put away the newest donations. Pasta noodles, canned sauces, canned vegetables, soups, boxes of crackers, stuff like that. It took me a little over an hour to get it all done, but I still made good time. By the time I left the pantry, the parish hall was completely empty. I stretched, left the cart in the pantry, and made my way back to the office to finish up and take Anthony home. I remember that it was only around 7 p.m., and I was pretty pumped to be finishing up around a half hour early. So far, it'd been a pretty good day. Then, I walked into the office and found Pastor Jonah pinning my brother down onto his desk with his face buried in his neck. And my body just stopped. I froze up, unsure what to do, how to react, what to say. I vaguely remember that my mind flashed back to some fucked up stories I'd heard about priests and kids. But before I could really even process what I was seeing, Pastor Jonah looked over at me, surprise written all over his face.
Deshaun!
He said, before his lips curled into a grin. As they did, I noticed the blood trickling down them, and the blood dribbling out of my little brother's neck. Whatever I'd heard about priests and kids, this was something much worse. Anthony stared at me, eyes wide and frightened. He whimpered in pain. He was losing so much blood. I didn't know what to do.
You're done early?
The pastor asked, as if I didn't just catch him drinking my brother's blood. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. Pastor Jonah wasn't a particularly big man, but he was still bigger than me, and with that blood running down his chin, he didn't even look human. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Pastor Jonah just kept up his sheepish grin.
Horrible timing on your part.
He said, his voice still friendly and affable.
Relax. Just relax. There's nothing to worry about. I can assure you.
What the hell are you doing? Was all I managed to stammer out. My eyes shifted to Anthony again. He looked so pale. He looked so weak.
A man's gotta eat.
Pastor Jonah replied, as if that answered my question. I noticed him lingering close to Anthony, and I noticed the empty bottles of wine on a nearby table. As soon as I saw them, Pastor Jonah's smile turned a little apologetic.
Waste not, want not,
he said coolly, before taking a step toward me. I stumbled back, trying to get out of his reach as he took off after me. All my thoughts were overridden by the complete and utter panic. All I could think about was getting away from this thing in front of me. I wanted to go back for Anthony, but Pastor Jonah kept coming for me, and I didn't know what else to do but run. I've gone back on that night 1,000 times, over and over again, trying to think of how I could have done things better, fantasizing about how I could have saved my brother and exposed Father Jonah for the monster he was. But none of that changes the fact that I ran away. I ran like a coward, and I never saw Anthony again. Sure, I went to the police. That's the first thing I did. But when a black teenager in a rough neighborhood runs up to a cop, crying and screaming about a blood-sucking priest, the cop's first reaction isn't going to be, "Oh golly gee, I should really help this poor young man and save his brother from that vampire." It's, "What the fuck kind of drug is this little bastard on?" Followed by my very first arrest. And things just got worse after that. They found Anthony dead in the streets the next morning. Pastor Jonah had insisted he'd walked both me and Anthony to the door and bid us goodbye. Then when pressed, he claimed that I'd been acting out of it while I'd been working, and went on about how he'd been concerned I might have been getting into drugs and had been waiting for some solid evidence before going to my parents about it. From there, the narrative became that we'd been jumped by a mugger. I'd gotten away, and Anthony hadn't. Then, too baked out of my mind to remember any actual details of what had happened, I'd gone to some cop, rambling about how Pastor Jonah had murdered my brother. And my parents, they ate it all up. My mom quietly blamed me for what had happened. The way she saw it, I should have protected Anthony. And even though she was wrong about the details of what had happened, part of me always believed she was right. I should have protected my little brother. Maybe if I had, he wouldn't have died that night. After my parents divorced, she more or less completely stopped talking to me. She never forgave me for what had happened that night, or at least what she thought had happened. And on some level, I didn't blame her for that. My dad, he was a little more understanding. He grieved, yes, but he didn't take it out on me the same way Mom did. He wrote off the more supernatural aspects of my story as PTSD and tried to get me some help. He kept an eye on me to keep me sober. Not that I'd ever been into drugs in the first place. And though he couldn't really afford therapy, he still tried to be a listening ear. He never stopped grieving Anthony, but he never hated me for what had happened. Not like Mom did. And when he passed away in a workplace accident a few years later, I was more or less alone in the world. And it was all because of that one night. That one night destroyed everything I had. Destroyed my family. Took away my brother. And in a lot of ways, it destroyed me too. And God, I couldn't wait to return the favor. I caught Pastor Jonah in the parish hall after Mass. A few people had hung back to socialize, but they'd left, leaving only me and the pastor. 15 years, and he hadn't even fucking aged. But I guess that was normal with vampires, wasn't it? He'd been in the middle of stacking some of the chairs to put them away when he noticed me coming back in.
Ah, lending a hand, huh?
He asked, flashing me a charismatic grin I'd been seeing in my nightmares for over a decade. Something like that, I said, before helping him stack some of the chairs.
Well, it's much appreciated.
He said.
Don't think I've seen you around before. Have we met?
Years ago, I said. I've been out of town.
Really? Whereabouts?
Lots of places. Did a few years in the army. Did a couple of tours there. Then I went to school. I'm working in data analysis now. Can't really complain.
A desk job, huh?
Pastor Jonah asked.
That's the life for some people, I suppose.
Not for you, though? I asked, as we finished up with the chairs.
Oh no. I think my true calling is here. Guiding people to their best selves. It's fulfilling.
If you say so, I said with a shrug. I don't personally think you need a higher power to make yourself a better person. Just be a better person. It's not that complicated. Or fake it. I mean, that's what you do. Right, Jonah? The pastor looked over at me, eyes narrowing a little.
Excuse me?
He asked. You heard me. My eyes locked with his. His expression was hard to read for a moment, before a smile returned.
I don't think I understand what you're talking about.
I think you do. You know, it's said that the gift of vampirism was bestowed by the devil herself. Kinda strange to have a vampire priest then, isn't it? I mean, you'd think a vampire wouldn't even be able to go inside of a church, right? His smile faltered for a moment, but his eyes never left me.
Ah.
He finally said, before letting out a small chuckle.
Deshaun Phillips. I barely recognize you.
Aging does that to a person, I replied. Not that you'd know.
Right.
He said softly.
This is about your brother, isn't it? Andrew?
Anthony, I hissed.
Anthony. Right. I remember him. Good kid. Beautiful funeral service, although, if I recall, your mother didn't want you there.
No. You made sure of that, didn't you? I replied bitterly. He shrugged.
A man's gotta eat. In all fairness, I was planning on taking you both. It would have been so much cleaner that way.
Yeah. A man's gotta eat. I scoffed. You know, most vampires don't need to kill when they feed. Guess you never got the memo. I caught a slight twitch in his eye.
Most vampires either scavenge like dogs, or try to pretend they're something they're not. I simply believe in maintaining a healthy pantry.
Right. No more than 2 or 3 a year, right? I asked. You know, I've been keeping an eye on the obituaries around here over the years. Lot of unsolved muggings in this area. People, usually teenage boys, turning up with their throats slashed. Just like my brother. Hell, just like that boy whose funeral you were officiating that night. I caught his grin growing a little wider and felt a flare of rage in my chest. He was proud of it.
What can I say? I like it fresh.
He said, That's really what you've got to say for yourself? I'm asking you what kind of sick fuck kills teenage boys, then whispers his fucking condolences to the grieving parents at the funeral. And that's all you've got to say for yourself?
I am what I am.
Jonah said. I've met enough vampires by now to know that that's bullshit. You can say whatever you want to justify the shit you've done, but it won't. You can't. You want to know how many vampires I've met that weren't anywhere near as fucked up as you are? Pastor? Not a goddamn one. You know, I really did believe that you were all evil for a while. But the truth of it is so much fucking worse. Nothing in this world is inherently evil, Jonah. Not even vampires. No. You made a choice to do the things you've done. The things you did to Anthony, to Kenny, to all those other boys. That was the choice you made, not a byproduct of your fucking vampirism. You chose it!
Perhaps I did.
he said with a shrug.
But what difference does it make? What exactly were you hoping to accomplish here, Deshaun?
I had to see you, I said.
Oh, and what? Give me a stern talking to?
Well, that. And it's easier to shoot you if we're in the same room. I pulled my pistol on him. Jonah just stared down the barrel before busting into a wild laughter.
Oh, you are funny. You really think that is gonna do anything to me? I'm a vampire, you arrogant little shit. It's not going to work.
No? I asked. You sure about that? 'Cause unless you've got a valid reason as to why you can stand inside of a church without bursting into flames, I'm not sure you're half as powerful as you're pretending to be. His smile faded. Me, on the other hand, I caught myself smirking. Yeah, you can save the bullshit. Like I said, I've run into a lot of vampires over the past couple of years. For what it's worth, I do think it was a good idea to make up all that mythology. Silver, stakes, crosses, no reflections. Makes it easier to hide in plain sight. Although, it doesn't really do jack shit for you against someone who knows, does it? Pastor Jonah remained silent, his body stock still. That night you killed Anthony. When you came for me right after, that was the most afraid I'd ever been. You want to know why I'm here, Jonah? I'm here because I want you to have that same feeling. I want you to feel it. Right now, staring down the barrel of this gun and knowing that you're helpless. That nobody is gonna save you. I want you to feel what they all had to feel. Can you do that for me? He still didn't speak. Not at first, anyway. I didn't think he knew what to say, but I could see the fear in his eyes. And when he finally broke the silence, all he could say was this.
But Deshaun, wait. Think about this.
Oh, I've been thinking about this for 15 years, I replied coolly. What I'm doing right now is savoring this. It's cathartic. Really fucking cathartic.
Deshaun, please!
I gotta know, do you really believe in the things you were preaching? I mean, I know vampires are children of Satan and all that, but do you really believe that someone like you can go to heaven? Not a vampire, but someone like you. A murderer, a sadist, a pig. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. I could hear his heavy breathing as he tried to think of something he could say to talk his way out of this. I wouldn't imagine so, I said. A regular vampire priest? Maybe. Probably. But you? No. No matter what you've done for this community, I think even God's love has limits. But I guess you'll be finding out, won't you?
Deshaun, please!
I pulled the trigger. Pastor Jonah hit the ground, one of his eyes replaced by a bloody hole. I put 2 more bullets in his head for good measure. Once I was sure he wasn't getting up, I left. I left that church behind. I left that city behind. And finally, I left the past behind.